Welcome to the Data Room, where we share best practices and actionable tips on being a data-driven company, or as we call it, data first. If you're a B2B revenue leader looking to scale your growth stage business, come and join experienced CEO and tech founder Scott Stouffer in the Data Room. Hi everyone, welcome to the Data Room. I am here this week again with scaleMatters CEO and co-founder Scott Stouffer, and this week we are looking into the early hiring decisions that early stage CEOs are making, specifically when it comes to the revenue operations function. So you might be closing your first customers and ramping up your sales and marketing strategies, which means you're probably capturing more data in your CRM and analytics tools, hopefully. So where do you go from here? What do you do next? How do you set yourself up for success? This might be the right time to bring in a revenue operations leader or a data analyst, but honestly, how do you know? How do you prepare? And who do you hire? I'm hoping today Scott can help provide some help from his own experience as a CEO of a number of companies, as well as his insights from working with a number of B2B startups. So he's lived it all. And Scott, I first want to start with the decision-making process in an early stage company. Can you give some insight into kind of the key decisions that are being made, and more importantly, since this is called the Data Room, what data can help CEOs make those decisions?
Sure. So there are critical competencies that need to be established at different stages of a company's growth. And the most successful companies achieve these competencies quickly, of course, and with minimal cash burn. And the companies that get there quickest tend to be those that have powerful data, which helps to inform executive decision making. So, for example, in the early stages, leadership teams need data that helps them optimize product market message fit. This includes data that helps companies understand the profile of the customers that are most likely to buy and receive significant value from the products or services offered. This is what we typically call ideal customer profile. It also includes data that describes the language prospects use to discuss their priorities, discuss their challenges, and understanding this language is critical in order to ensure that a company's messaging best resonates with the target market. After you've sort of sufficiently tuned for product market message fit, you then need to shift your attention to building a very effective go-to-market motion. And this is where you need to be able to model what that motion or that process actually is, and then measure at a very granular level each step of the process so that you can understand where there's friction, for example. We generally refer to this type of data as funnel data or conversion data, and it includes things like conversion rates and cycle times through each step of the lead to deal process. You need to be able to isolate this conversion data, though, for each of the strategies or the channels that you're investing in to source prospects, so that you start to understand which of these approaches are more effective or which are least effective. You also need to be able to isolate this conversion data for each individual sales rep and or SDR, because when there's friction, you need to be able to figure out, is this systemic friction or is it simply related to one or more underperforming individuals? Now, data is most useful when it's actionable, and the most actionable conversion data is that which comes early in the lead to deal process, because then there's sort of still time, if you will, to make a course correction or to make a difference. So with that in mind, we think it's important for companies to make very detailed bookings plan models, which start with top of funnel assumptions, and that becomes sort of a comparative data source. And that way, when actual performance is disconnected, if you will, from the planned performance, it helps the leadership team to kind of zero in on the assumptions that were off base and take tailored and prescriptive action in response. Otherwise, the leadership teams tend to flail, and their course correcting initiatives are often not grounded in strong logic, and then they sort of end up whipsawing all over the place, and it takes a long time to really build that effective go-to-market engine if they don't have the supporting data that they need.
Yeah, I definitely agree. In my own conversations, talking to some early stage companies, they may sometimes forgo that initial preparation and intentionality to create those assumptions in order to then test and evaluate them. So you've provided a good understanding of what is actually useful data, which is actionable data. And so once you kind of determine what data you need to capture and what data you need to report on, it seems like that would be the right time, or a good time to start considering hiring either a business analyst or a revenue operations leader. And I think this is a great time to discern the differences between those two roles. And in your experience, Scott, what are some of the benefits of working with a business analyst and or a revenue operations leader?
Yeah, so I mean, early stage companies need to get the foundational stuff right when it comes to RevOps, and that means first implementing any tech tools that are necessary to make the jobs of your sales and marketing staff more efficient. We typically think of the core tech stack at this point to be a marketing automation platform and a CRM. But if you have an inside sales motion, we would also recommend to companies that they have a sales acceleration tool of some sort and a conversation intelligence tool, kind of as the core elements. So the first thing you have to get right is implementing those tools right so that they actually do the job of supporting the sales and marketing people the way they're intended. At the same time, though, the CEO and the revenue leaders will constantly need to be making course correcting decisions because they're at a very vulnerable stage of the business, and they're trying to ensure that they eventually achieve an effective go to market motion. And so it's very important that the tech stack also be set up in a way that produces high integrity data that supports that executive level decision making. You're asking about the types of people to hire. The RevOps field is on fire right now. It's actually very difficult to find one person who has the skills to properly set up each of these core tech stack tools, make sure they are synchronized and integrated with each other, and then also make sure that they're actually set up in a way to surface strategic insights for the revenue leaders. This ability to go broad and deep on the go-to-market tech stack, it typically really only exists among folks who have been doing this for 10 years or more, and they've had enough exposure to senior leadership teams to really understand the strategic data needs for the go-to-market team. On top of that, the person with the skill set to get all this stuff right from the get-go may sort of be overkill once the initial heavy lifting is over. So, I mean, our recommendation is probably for the first hire to be someone with the skills and experience to build and manage the function, the RevOps function, as a strategic asset to the company, and then let that person outsource the specific tasks that are requiring deep technical or deep data talent kind of on an as-needed basis. The revenue leader then would effectively maintain the blueprint for how the function should evolve over time, but also provide the continuity across the various tech and data specific tasks that need to regularly occur. Assuming that this RevOps leader sort of has the strategic chops to think about go-to-market data requirements and that they can articulate those requirements to the technical implementers, then I believe a business analyst would be a second important hire. And their initial responsibility would probably focus on building out a very detailed bookings plan model so that they can measure performance against and ultimately provide actionable insights once there is enough data flowing to make analytics worthwhile.
Yeah, I think in past interviews or episodes, we've talked about the importance of a RevOps foundation, time and time again. You do make an interesting point about having that RevOps leader be the manager of the blueprint and then maybe outsourcing certain technical or data tactics there. I think, coming from my marketing experience, it's similar to the idea of having like a marketing manager and then you're outsourcing the actual content creation or production. So the idea that you need all of these people internally, to your point, Scott, might be a little bit of overkill. So you noted that start maybe potentially with that RevOps strategic leader as the first hire, and then an analyst following after that. I want to pose a question. Do you think there's an argument to be made for hiring both an analyst and a RevOps leader at the same time?
Oh, absolutely. If you can afford to, you should absolutely try to hire both, because they perform very different roles, and both of them are very essential in order to achieve the effective go-to-market engine. RevOps leader has primary responsibility for ensuring that the go-to-market tech stack is properly configured so that it maximizes the efficiency of the sales and marketing teams, but also so that it surfaces granular and highly reliable data, that can be used to inform executive decision making. The business analyst, though, is the primary consumer of the data. One of the things very few early and growth stage companies think about is, even if they have great data, they often don't have anyone who either has the time or the skill set to stare at the data and interpret it and basically separate the signal from the noise and figure out what's important there. And that's what the business analyst does. So they use their analytical skills to properly interpret the data and all of its nuances, and then prepare these curated insights, if you will, for the executive team that are highly actionable and highly impactful. And that's a very different skill set than the RevOps leader that sort of owns the tech stack. The problem is that both of these roles are in high demand. They're hard to find. They're very expensive. Most early and growth stage businesses just really aren't comfortable making the type of investment that they would need to for these skill sets, even though the ROI is worth it. And one might argue that not investing in these skills actually diminishes a company's chances of survival. But unfortunately, sort of tradition abounds, or tradition prevails, and companies tend to be a lot more comfortable hiring one more salesperson rather than making the necessary investments to make sure that the kind of go-to-market back office, if you will, the tech and data infrastructure for go-to-market, is set up to make all the salespeople more effective. So, there is good news, which is there's an emerging class of managed RevOps, what we'll call managed RevOps service providers, that can tend to bring the full set of skill sets required from tech architecture, tech administration, data ops, business analyst skills, etc. They can bring that full capability to these earlier stage companies and do that for effectively the same cost as if you were just going to hire maybe a single modestly skilled CRM administrator. So this is probably the best legitimate avenue to, if you will, have your cake and eat it too. You get the same RevOps at scale capability that much larger companies have, but you can do that at a fraction of the cost and in a much quicker time frame than if you attempted to build it out yourself.
I like that. I think if you can find a partner or a RevOps kind of managed service provider that understands your business goals and understands how you're trying to build that go-to-market engine, it's definitely a worthwhile investment or alternative to building it all of it internally, because you can certainly do that as well. And who doesn't want to eat their cake and eat it too? And I think if you kind of are on that road of trying to figure out whether you are in the right place to hire your first RevOps leader, or even hiring that second analyst on, definitely assess where you're at. I think we've made a good point about establishing the hypotheses and the assumptions that you've had, and understand where you need to improve before you go in and you bring in more people. So I would encourage you, again, as we've done with all of our podcasts, to go to scalematters.com/assessment. That is a complimentary RevOps maturity assessment for listeners of this podcast. So check it out, scalematters.com/assessment. And we're going to wrap up today's episode. And Scott, thanks for all the insight that you brought this week. And we will see you next time in the data room.
See you, Heather. Bye.